Welcome back to this episode of the Women in Money Cafe. Now, we've called this one Messy Mortgages, and I'm not sure that that's the best name that we could have come up with it, but it's what sprung to mind because it's just myself and Jennifer on the sofa today. So, Jennifer, how you doing?
I'm all right, thanks, Julie. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Right, so it was more, I'm going to be really honest here. This episode we've been wanting to make for a couple of months now. And a lot of it is personally driven because I want to know the answers to these questions. And I know I'm not the only person. It's just when you're starting out in life, you maybe get your first house and your first mortgage, it's reasonably straightforward, I think. But then once you're maybe on second or third or fourth relationships or you're moving house, life experiences have taught us things that we maybe approach mortgages and houses slightly differently the next time round. So I'm really glad Jennifer's here today because she's going to answer all my questions and all the questions that you guys kindly sent in. So, Jennifer, messy mortgages, is that a good way to describe them?
Yeah, I probably think so. I think that it's things certainly can get messy with your mortgages. One, for whenever you're setting it up, and two, if any arguments ensue from any separation thereafter. But yeah, I think messy mortgages is probably quite a good title for it.
So, what I've got is I've got a list of questions here that have been sent to me when I was saying that we were going to do this episode. And what I'd like to do, with your permission, is let's just run through the questions and you can kind of tackle the experienced expert mortgage side and anything that looks like it's going to be emotive. Because some of the situations I have come across, just we can maybe talk through the different ways that people can approach these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.
All right, let's kick off then with the first question. Okay. And I'm going to guess this is a really common one. And that's when you've got a couple and they're going to buy a house, and one person has got a significantly larger deposit than the other. How do people handle that, Jennifer, or how do you advise them?
We would always advise that they get something legal kind of drawn up. So a minute of agreement usually. So that if someone's say putting in 40,000 and someone else is only putting in 20, that it's fair should something happen. As I know whenever people are starting to buy their first house together and everything like that, they think they're going to be together forever. Doesn't always work out that way. So we always look at it in the sense of, oh, how do you protect yourself should things change? So a minute of agreement would then show that, person A put in 40,000. So if they separate, they get that back first, and person B put in 20, so they get that, and then they split it thereafter. Because without that minute of agreement, if they were to separate, you're entitled to 50-50. So regardless of if you've saved that over a long period of time, you sold a different house, if you don't have those things in place in the background, then the other half, if it's a bad falling out and a bad separation, that they can take 50-50.
All right. Okay. What I would like to do then is just come back to you with a couple of things. Then, what is a minute of agreement?
So a minute of agreement is a legal document that's drawn up. It's kind of held separately from your title deeds and everything else. You can get it for, not just things relation to houses. You can get it for different separations and any sort of basic legal document. It's not horrendously expensive. You're usually talking about 150 to 180 plus VAT. But if it gives you that level of protection, it's worth its weight in gold.
All right. And the see the solicitor that's doing the conveyancing for me, can they do this?
Yeah, in the most part they do. And even though we would recommend it, sometimes the solicitor will also recommend it if someone else is putting in a larger deposit, just to make sure they're protected. And see if I've got a couple that they might think that might start an argument between them, I'll normally speak to the other one and say, do you want me to raise this with your solicitor, and get them to also ask you, so that it doesn't feel like it's someone deliberately trying to, keep all their assets and they're always looking at the separation.
All right. Okay. That's really good. And then, so a solicitor can do it for me, the one that's doing the conveyancing, and it's not going to cost me a lot of money in the grand scheme of the fact I'm probably spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on a house,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So then what you would say, if we take an example, then let's say we are, you and me, we're buying a house and it's worth £200,000. I'm putting in £50,000 and you're putting in £100,000.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, let me see if I can keep myself right on the maths here, right? And then the day after we buy it, we have an almighty argument, and that's it. We're going our separate ways.
Yeah.
So the house is getting sold for 200,000 because we just bought it for 200,000. You're getting your 100,000 back, and I'm getting my 50,000 back. And then the
Yeah.
remainder is split 50-50.
Yeah, well, I would not that you would have paid off a huge amount of equity in one day, but yes, the rest of it would then be split. You usually have a clause within your minute of agreement as well to say that that any costs may be split. So if you've got any early repayment charge, that can come off the both of kind of the equity that's left over, just to make sure that one party isn't unfairly paying more than what they're meant to.
Okay. Now, I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Let's say we lasted a bit longer than a day.
2 days.
Even longer. Let's say it's like 20 years.
Okay.
So will the same thing apply if we separate and we sell the house in 20 years' time? It's just I'm getting my 50 back, you're getting your 100 back, and the remaining equity is split 50-50.
Yeah, so it doesn't really have a time limit on it unless anything drastically changes in the law. You wouldn't have a minute of agreement and even put a time frame on it of just the mortgage term. You would just say for the relation of that property. So unless anything drastically changes within the law, it should stay kind of binding until that point.
Okay, so I guess where I'm going with that one as well is when it's over a longer period of time, is it possible that when you buy the house, you own it jointly 50-50? Can you set it up so that you own different proportions?
No, not really. So, see, in terms of whenever we are applying for a mortgage, whenever everything's being set up, you're each almost 100% liable for the mortgage payment. So, if one person misses it, it goes on both your credit reports. So, you're both entitled to 50-50 of the house. You can get different documents again. You could put in your minute of agreement that one owns more, but can't imagine many people going along with that unless they're definitely going to be overpaying a significant amount more to make it worth that. But in England, for instance, you can get tenants in common, whereas that's not a thing that you can get up here.
Right, so in England, we could have it potentially so that I own 30% of the house and you own 70% of the house.
And it's more for them that they can own either different shares and it doesn't automatically go back to like the person that you're in the house with. Should you die, you can go to your own family and so on and so forth.
Right.
So yeah, slightly different in Scotland.
Okay, so that's tenants in common in England, but not an option up here in Scotland. It's 50
No,
50 all the way. All
yep,
right.
50-50.
Okay. So just wondering, you were saying there that when you find this scenario, sometimes you mention, shall I mention it to the solicitor? I'm thinking about one specific example because sometimes the reason somebody's got more money for a deposit than the other, it can be for reasons such as an inheritance or the money has a
Mhm.
lot of meaning to that individual. So, how do you approach that conversation with people, or what kind of things have you seen?
We would always discuss it with them because I have had cases in the past where, there's one where a grandparent gifted their grandson money for a deposit to buy the house. We said, make sure you get a minute of agreement to protect everything. But they didn't. So whenever they separated, his other half at that time took half of it because she was entitled to it. So she did. So that was emotionally very difficult because he seen it as this was an inheritance and it was being used so that it could be something that he could live in. Whereas now he's down to half of it, whereas he should have had more of a minute of agreement had it been in place. So people always say, oh, I'll get round to it, I'll get round to it because more things can become more pressing whenever you are getting ready to buy the house. But if you don't have that in place, it's seen as 50-50, you've got to look at it going for the sake of £180.
Hmm.
Just get it done.
Yeah. I suppose as well as, buying a house, it's not as stressful, isn't it? And there's a lot that needs to be done
Yes, lots to
between
sign, lots to do.
all the paperwork. So, but I guess what I would say to people is that this is an investment of hundreds of thousands of pounds and it is for a long period of time. You're talking 10, 20, 30, or 40 years. Why would you not sit down and have a conversation with your other half about what money means to you, what the house means to you, and maybe just having those conversations? Well, if something went wrong, how would we want to behave towards each other?
Absolutely, because I think whenever you're buying the house, everything is set up as if you're going to be in it forever. Whereas you need to be able to have that realistic conversation to go, right, if this happened, what are we doing? How's this going to work out so that you can hopefully end it as amicably as possible?
All right. So, have you seen any really good practice from some of the people that you've worked with on this? Obviously, you told us about the bad practice.
No, well, really good one would just be that the solicitors do tend to get it sorted earlier, but it's not always something that's in their mind either. So see, whenever it's been a really busy market over the last kind of year or two, the solicitors, for the most part, are just trying to get a lot of completions through. So unless they have it on their radar that they should be looking at that and possibly looking at a will as well, they're not always going to do it. So, because at the end of the day, it is the person who's buying's responsibility to make sure that they are protecting what they're putting in, if they want to.
Right, so going back to you and me buying this house, when do we get the minute of agreement? Do we get it after we've bought it? Or can we get it before we
And
buy it?
you could, well, you can get it before you would get on the title deeds. So you get it throughout the kind of conveyancing process, so that it would be like in relation to property, 123 at ABC Street, and it would be for that house. And you would get it in relation to that. So you can sign it all, get it all ready even before you've officially got the title deeds. But you wouldn't look to do it, months in advance, for instance. You'd only be looking to do it once you've found the house you're going for and once the process has started.
Okay, so if I find myself in the situation, then when I've first engaged with my solicitor, just let them know I want one of these. Can you get it
Mm-hmm.
drafted? So I don't need to think about it again with all the other stuff that's going on. And then once we've bought the property, let's just get us both to sign it and then it's job done.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you can even get one done retrospectively. So you could, so say for instance, someone's sitting there going, "Oh, I did put in an extra £50,000 over and
Oh,
above my other
right.
half." Well, if they both need to agree, so you can't just do it on the sly. Both parties need to go and sign and agree to it. But you could get something set up to say, right, I put extra in and I'm now worried, so I want to protect that. Can we agree to get this in place?
Oh, right. That's great. Okay, so how you broach that conversation is a whole different thing. But if you're sitting there and you're listening to this thinking, shit, I wish I'd got one of them. Good news. You can still
Absolutely.
get one, but probably sitting down and having a conversation just about money in general with your partner rather than diving right in with, I want one of these, might be the
Yes.
way forward. All right, that's really good. Okay, that's great. So we've kind of boxed off somebody's got more money, bigger deposit than the other. I think another situation that's really common then that can lead to a bit of friction when you're in a second relationship is that when you're going to sort of buy a house together is when you find one person's earning significantly more than the other. So how have you seen that handled?
It depends on the reasons for it. If one's, earning a lot more than the other because the other one's been raising the children, then it still seems to be that they're either put things in 50-50 or one person puts more in order to keep everything going for the house. But for instance, if it's not for that and one person is wanting to overpay or make bigger payments into it and try and clear it off all a bit sooner, then they can by all means make the overpayments into the mortgage. At the end of the day, the mortgage company will still see it as 50-50, but you're always 100% liable if the other person misses a payment. So if you were looking to do that again, you probably would want a minute of agreement drawn up just to protect yourself, because you could make all these overpayments, but unless you're really shown and that's been in the agreement, if you come to separate, there's no guarantee you'll get any of that back.
Okay, so we've got the situation there where there's no children involved, let's assume, and it's just you've got one person's paying a lot more towards the mortgage than the other one. Again, that's getting a minute of agreement in place to reflect that.
Absolutely.
And then I know because of our previous conversations that if you're going down this route, you need to save all your bank statements.
Yeah, so you want to be able to prove it as well. So if, for instance, you're having your minute of agreement that you're saying that you're going to overpay £500 a month towards the capital of it, and that is going to happen, if you were to separate, your other half could say, well, in month 36 of this time period, you didn't do that. So you're going to want to be able to evidence that no, you did, and you continue to make those kind of overpayments to it, just to make sure that you've got a leg to stand on. Because if not, you don't want them coming back saying, well, not all of that is valid now because you can't prove that you were making these overpayments.
Okay, all right, that's really good. So documentation and record keeping on absolutely
Yeah.
everything. I guess then I would say as well is if you're in a couple and you have got one that's earning a lot more than the other, and you're trying to figure out, well, how do we fairly split the household costs? And I think we can get really focused on like how much the mortgage is, how much the gas and electricity is, and how you're going to organize your money. I think what I would encourage people to think about is there are other ways that you contribute to the relationship than just money. And it's having a
Absolutely.
wider conversation about what your expectations are of each other and what your expectations are of the relationship. And just because one person's earning a lot more right now than the other, that doesn't mean it will always be that way. And so I guess my big piece of advice is whichever side of the fence you're on right now, ask yourself how you would feel if that changed at some point in the future, because it can.
Oh, it absolutely can. And we get some people who maybe do earn a lot more than the other half, but they still either pay in 50-50 because we get some people who are very much that they want to be responsible for half. Whereas we've got other people who go, well, no, actually, it's a percentage of what we earn is what they're putting in. So they work it out quite differently. Because see if someone really wanted to go down the 50-50 route and one of them, was self-employed or the other one had bad credit, for instance, you could then be going, well, you're having to go to an off the high street bank, so this is costing you an extra 150 more a month. Are you splitting that, or is the person with a bad credit paying it?
Mm. Do you see it way more one way than the other, either 50-50 or a percentage basis?
It honestly tends to depend if they've got children or not. If someone, like, so say someone is a really high earner, so they're earning over 100,000, I would tend to see that they do put more into the joint account and they do cover more of the bills for that. But if it's, a difference of a few £1,000s, no, I still get a lot of people that are, married and have been for years that they've got their joint account for bills, everything else is separate, and they put 50-50, they put the exact same in.
All right. Okay. And I think the other tip I would add in is, circumstances change over time. And just because you start one way doesn't mean that you're married to doing it that way.
Absolutely.
So, pardon the pun there, by the way, that was unintentional.
But
But
you've,
it's
you've
just,
got to be able to review it because if not, you could get in the position where you're not able to have quite an open and honest conversation with the other half. And although you're maybe putting in 50% of the bills, you could be hugely struggling with the other costs that you have on the other side. And if you can't have that conversation, then you're just giving yourself an awful lot more worry and an awful lot more stress that you may not need.
plus the fact your other half might be oblivious to
Exactly.
how difficult it might be for you. And I'm going to guess that sometimes it's difficult for people to broach this conversation because there's so much shame around it. To
Absolutely.
open up and say, actually, I'm struggling with this is quite a challenging thing to do.
It is because everyone puts so much emotion around everything in relation to money. The car they drive, the home that they're in, and what they've got in the remainder of their bank account at the end of the month, or what they don't if they're constantly having to go in and out of overdrafts. So you need to be able to have quite an honest conversation because if not, it does become this thing that people almost hide from. And you don't want to get to the point where you're not able to have that conversation because I have known clients in the past where one of them's put themselves into a trust deed and didn't tell their other half
Oh, God.
and that impacts on them then going forward for any house for anything like that in the future. But that's because there is so much shame associated with not being able to manage it.
So I'm going to share a quick story. If you're sitting there and you're thinking, I don't know how to go and have this conversation to let them know that I'm struggling with money, here's a different way to look at it. Okay. So I don't think it's any secret. So I've got Brian, the husband that I'm not with anymore, right? But we're still very good friends. And like for the 20, 25 years that we were together, it was always me that had a lot more money than him. But we had joint money, so it was fine. But for a long time, he hasn't had as much money, so hasn't had the same freedom that I've had. And now, inadvertently, unexpectedly, don't ask too many questions. We're going on holiday together. It's for our son. And now Brian's in a much better place and he's able to help me financially with the holiday. And it was me saying to him, look, I can come away with you, but I can't afford to do all the things that you can afford to do because this has kind of landed on me unexpectedly. And now he's able to help me out. And so
Oh,
that's
that's
making
lovely.
him feel really good about himself. And I had to really just sort of give myself a right good talking to just accept his help. And it's just like, okay, now this is a nice thing for him to be able to do. And it's actually nice for me to be able to accept some help from him as well. So that's what I mean. The roles can reverse. And it's ask yourself, how would you feel if you were in the opposite side of the fence?
Absolutely. I think I'd love it if my other half took me away on holiday.
Yeah, he has just landed a very expensive holiday on me. So, and so that's it. So, if you're sitting there and you think, I don't know how to broach this conversation, ask yourself how you would react if you were the person on the other side of the conversation, because we all just care about each other. And if you're in a relationship, presumably you want to help each other and support each other as well.
Absolutely. Conversations around money should never be taboo. They should just be something that is very kind of day to day and very ordinary. Because if not, you make it a much bigger thing than it has to be. But money has one, a lot of emotional control, but a lot of power within what you're able to do as a couple and where your stress levels are. So if
Mm.
you need to make sure that you can speak to your other half about that without it getting, I don't know, too blamey on anything either.
So, my top tips for chatting about money with your partner It's a bit like food shopping. Don't go food shopping when you're hungry. Okay. We all know that. So if you need to have a conversation about money, don't wait until the big bills come in or something emotive's kicked off. Pick your time when you're both feeling calm and safe. Maybe have a nice meal and give forewarning that you want to talk about money as well. They're my top tips.
Absolutely. You don't, no one wants that to be strung, like kind of sprung on them for anything last minute because they feel almost attacked from it. Whereas I'm probably quite sad that I've got a budget planner that I have that runs like for the next 13 weeks for both the business and then also for me personally. And anytime Lindsay ever looks at getting a new car or anything like that might change it, I'm like, it's like in the budget planner. Like you've got to see that. So she'll now always slag me to say if she's got to give me 3 financial projections to buy a bag of crisps.
I love it. Do you know what's really good about that, though? It means that you've got some parameters and agreements set out in advance,
Absolutely.
which really helps because otherwise, when you're trying to make a big financial decision and you've got no parameters in place, then conversation can go anywhere, can't it?
Yeah, never a good
Quite
thing at
often
all.
not where you want it to. Okay, I've
No,
got I've got one more question for you, and it's an awkward one. All
love
right.
it. Of course, it's an awkward one.
So this is from a couple who are in their 40s, both on their second relationships. They live
Okay,
separately at the moment. They are thinking they might want to buy a house together. But
okay,
one of them has a burning desire to get rid of their mortgage as quickly as possible. And the other
okay.
one can't afford to do that. So they asked the question, can they have different mortgage terms?
If they buy different houses, yes. If they buy the same house, then your mortgage company is going to look at you and say, "We're giving you 100,000 over this term." They're not looking at it going, "Right, we're giving you 50,000 and you another 50,000." So it will be based on the total amount. But again, you could have something separately drawn up to say that you're looking to overpay. So in order to do that, you'd normally want to look at, I guess, your monthly payment, what the actual capital is that you're repaying out with the take that into consideration, and then whatever it is that you wanted to overpay it with, so that you can show them something tangible rather than just saying I paid 50,000, because paying 50,000 over for £100,000 mortgage, you're not actually paying for half the house if you're doing it over the term, because a lot of that is also interest. So yeah, find out what the capital is, keep a spreadsheet, make sure you've got something like the documents, everything, keep your bank statements and get a minute of agreement.
Okay, or buy separate houses.
Or buy separate houses. Yeah.
Okay, so for the person that was asking this, you're going to need a spreadsheet then, and the critical
Or
bit. Or what? Sorry, Jennifer.
I was gonna say, or just look at 2 different Rightmove accounts.
Two different right. Look at it. I'll look at two different Rightmove accounts. No, you're going to need a spreadsheet, and the critical bit of information is how much of the monthly repayment is made up of capital, and that's going to help you keep track of where you're at with it. We've got the minute of agreement again, and bank statements from the year dot are your answer to this one. Okay, the serious question though, Jennifer, right? As like when I was growing up, and we've established I'm a lot older than you, that you had this concept of the 2.4 nuclear family and blah, 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 all the rest of it. And that is firmly out the window.
Oh,
That just doesn't
absolutely.
exist anymore. But financial services thinks that it still does. So, do you think that in the future the lending will get more innovative as people have more complex sort of family dynamics?
Not in terms of who would necessarily repay it or in terms of shares, because if a bank, for instance, was going to come and repossess you, they're repossessing the house. So they don't really care that you've paid your half off and it's your other half that hasn't. So for that, probably no. But in lending, it's already taken into consideration. So if someone earns 70,000, the other person earns 40, that's already worked into what their overall affordability is. They don't fully look at you individually and then cap it out at the lowest.
And that's them looking at it managing their risk, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wonder the way we've had the challenger banks come in and disrupt traditional banking. I'm wondering what the scope is for disruption in the mortgage market.
I imagine they'll do a few things in terms of how expensive life is getting. So they may look to extend terms and everything thereafter. Whenever Boris was talking about his almost intergenerational mortgages, instead of just making housing affordable, let's spread it over 4 generations so you can buy one family home. The things like that may well come into effect, but I don't think there's anything on the horizon that's going to be drastic anytime soon.
Okay. All right. So as we kind of wrap up now, I'm just curious if you've got any other stories or any other pearls of wisdom to share with the listeners.
I would also just make sure that you are getting the documents drawn up, because if not, it can become a much more awkward conversation if you're at the point where you are separating. Because if you're splitting up and it's bitter, then people do want their 50%, even if before they would have been like, no, no, actually, you're owed 70% out of this house. So make sure you're keeping on track with your documents and review it. Once you get it in place, it's not as if you need to forget that it's there, because circumstances can change and your relationship can change. So make sure that you can have, I guess, enough of an open relationship that you can go back and go, are we still happy with this and how this is working out? Or we're looking to change it so that it is 50-50, or maybe the other person's planning on putting a lump sum in that would make them equal to what the other person had initially done. They need to make sure they're updating those things in relation to that.
Okay, that's really helpful. Right. So, just a quick recap then. So, these minute of agreements are really important and they're super cheap when you consider how much money you're spending on a house. If you're sitting there and you're thinking, oh, I could have done with one of them, good news, it's not too late. You can still get one. But it sounds like the key here is thinking about how do you actually have the conversation about the money and the home and how, like you were saying, just make sure that you're reviewing where you're at with it and checking in with each other. So we were talking a couple of minutes ago about what if you're the person that's struggling? What if you're the person that's not struggling? Why don't you just check in with your partner, your other half, that they're okay? Let's not make assumptions about each other.
Yep,
All right.
absolutely, because you never know if they are struggling and they're just too embarrassed, particularly if they've always felt that they are the main breadwinner. See if things change, they don't get a bonus, so their overtime is not there, and they just haven't been able to tell you those things. It's always worthwhile checking in.
All right. Okay, so hopefully that's answered some of the messy mortgage questions. Now that Jennifer, as you know, is now our resident mortgage expert. So if you've got any other mortgage questions, then drop me a message and Jennifer will do her best to help you. But thank you for all the questions that you sent in. Jennifer, thanks for answering all the questions.
No, no problem at all. Any more that come in, just let me know.
All right. So just remains for me to say thank you very much for listening and take care of yourself until next time.